Hi, Steve here to give my attempt at a Hackintosh build. If you're unfamiliar with what Hackintosh is, it's basically placing Apple's unique operating system on compatible PC parts for an OS X experience. For this video, I'll be showing how I build my PC with the parts and resources that I will short. But first, let me lay some ground rules. First, this can be used as a guide for the parts I'm using, but there's more support on the site CustoMac.com. I would suggest going there if you're interested in building a PC like mine. Secondly, at the time of this recording, there's still problems with this system that I have not resolved yet, but I'll get to that in the second video. Lastly, at the time of this recording, I am running Mac OS X 10.9.2. The reason I bring this up is some of the drivers and workarounds I may use may not work with later updates of the OS and may require additional research. With that out of the way, let's start off with the parts. Since I'm going to be looking at this thing a lot, let's bring out the case. At first, I was going to use an MI-008 Tower Black P4 chassis that included a 250 watt power supply, but due to the tight space inside the case and the underpowered power supply, I decided to go with the BitFenix Mini ITX power case in Arctic White. I bought this off of Amazon used, but when I received it, it felt brand new. The original paperwork was there, and there wasn't any wear marks around the body. Going around the case, the I/O button and reset button are on the right side, as well as two USB 3.0 ports. Nothing else really special about the exterior besides the design to make it look like a miniature Mac Pro, which attracted me to it. On the inside, everything is separated for an organized look, such as the compartment for a power supply, the motherboard, a space for either a disk drive or USB hub, two internal fans, and a rack for multiple hard drives or any other peripheral that you wish. A nice touch on this case is featured on the top. It's a normal grill for both air to the inside and for looks, but can easily be removed to get a good view of the motherboard. Next is the motherboard. For this, I'm using the Gigabyte HA7N-Wi-Fi LGA socket 1150 board. It's a cheap and plastic board compatible with Intel Haswell processors. Included in the box are two average SATA cables, a Wi-Fi and Bluetooth combo antenna, and a rear I/O shield as well as standard literature. Going over the rear ports, there's a standard audio with optical audio out, 4 USB 3.0 ports, 2 Ethernet jacks, DVI, the ports for the Bluetooth and Wi-Fi antenna, full-size HDMI and mini HDMI, 2 USB 2.0 ports, and a PS2 port. Nothing too special about this board except for only one PCI expansion slot and 2 channels for RAM. Now for the processor. For this, I went with Tony Mac's suggestion for the budget CustoMac Mini and purchased the Intel Core i3-4330. I opted for a used processor that was only used for a week and found no lacking performance because of it. Anyway, this is just a basic Haswell processor that has 2 cores with hyperthreading, and under stock settings its operating frequency is at 3.5 GHz. Since I don't have a graphics card, I'll be using the integrated graphics with this processor, the Intel HD Graphics 4600. Included with the processor is the CPU fan and basic literature and Intel stickers. For RAM, I chose to use an 8GB pack of Corsair Vengeance DDR3 sticks. Again, nothing really special about these, I just chose what was considered exceptional according to Tony Mac. According to the forums, to get the best performance, 8GB of memory should at least be used, and that's what I went with. For storage, I chose a SanDisk 128GB solid-state drive. Again, nothing special about this drive, but I wanted a decently speedy experience, but without breaking the bank. Also, I didn't want to run into a boot zero error that Hackintoshes get when a rotating platter hard drive is used as a boot disk. As an extra touch, I dug out an old disk drive for my storage because I wanted the ability to burn images from this machine. Finally, the power supply. I chose a Corsair 500 watt PSU. I got a good deal on the supply and didn't need insane power. The great thing about this supply is the ability to add, remove, and swap power connectors, which makes it useful for wire management and for powering the components you actually want to use in the PC. Included in the box besides basic literature are the optional connectors like the SATA connectors, PCIe connectors, and peripheral/floppy connector combo. Also to mention, The cables that are attached by default are the ATX 24-pin connector and the CPU power connector. After obtaining all these parts, now it's time to put this stuff together. I should mention, some of this footage comes from the old case and power supply I was using, but it's basically all the same installation-wise. Starting with the motherboard and case, it was really easy to install. After aligning the board with the screw holes on the case, connecting the case's power, reset, USBs, and audio ports was next. Thanks to the printed labels on the board, as well as the literature materials, that was pretty simple as well. All that was needed was to match the different connectors, and remember that the arrow stands for the positive end of the connector. One thing to note is with the front audio, you get the option for an HD I/O connector and AC97 connector. Since the board is in the case already, the rear I/O shield was placed as well to get that out of the way. After attaching the cords to the case, now for the processor. First, I clamped the processor down to the board and attached the fan on top of the processor. The only tricky part was pressing the pins of the fan down to the board, because the fan has to be evenly on top of the processor to dissipate heat. After placing the connector for the CPU fan on the board, then came the simplest part, the RAM. Just like with any other computer, line up the RAM pins with the port, press down, and you have a connection in memory, plain and simple. For a solid state drive, I attached it to one of the caddies on the rack, and it looks pretty good. For a disk drive, I temporarily removed the front and took off the plastic plate that was covering the drive and attached it with the screws that came with the case. Before attaching any SATA cables to either the SSD or disk drive, I wanted to install a power supply first. I installed that by feeding in the cables first, then bringing in the unit. After the unit was sealed inside, I made all the proper connections from the supply to the board. The only frustrating part was wire management. In the end, I figured I'd tie any loose slack of wire, and as long as there wasn't any exposed wiring, or the wiring wasn't interfering with any of the fans, then it didn't need to look perfect. After placing in the last part, now I can finally start installing OS X Mavericks.